Disclaimer: this content is for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I never thought I'd change my mind. In fact, I was certain, so certain, that nothing could sway me. But life has a strange way of proving us wrong, doesn't it? One conversation, one unexpected moment, and suddenly everything shifts. That's exactly what happened with me and my husband. It all started with a simple discussion, something that seemed harmless at first. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, his arm casually draped over my shoulder, the soft hum of the TV in the background. "Just hear me out," he said, his voice calm but insistent. I folded my arms, already convinced I knew where this was going. I had made up my mind. Number absolutely not. But my husband, he's not the type to give up easily. He looked at me with that familiar mix of patience and determination, the same expression that had made me fall for him years ago. "I know you have your reasons," he continued, "but what if you're looking at it all wrong?" That's when I felt it, that tiny flicker of doubt, that whisper in the back of my mind that maybe, just maybe, he had a point. I wanted to dismiss it, to stick to my decision, but something in his voice made me pause. Was I being stubborn? Or was I truly convinced that my way was the right way? And then he said something that changed everything. Something I never expected. Something that made my heart pound a little faster and my hands tighten around the fabric of my sweater. At that moment, I wasn't sure if I was more shocked or intrigued. Have you ever had a moment like that, where someone challenges your perspective so deeply that you don't know whether to argue or reconsider? I bet you have, and trust me, this one was a game changer. But before I tell you what happened next, I want to know, have you ever been in a situation where your partner made you rethink something you were absolutely sure about? Let me know in the comments. And if you think you already know where this story is going, well, let's just say you might be surprised. Stay with me, because this is just the beginning. I stared at him, my mind racing. His words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. I wanted to brush them off, to push back with all the reasons I had built up in my head. But something in his voice, steady, sincere, made me hesitate. He wasn't just trying to convince me. He truly believed what he was saying, and that scared me a little. I shifted on the couch, pulling my legs up under me. "You really think this is the right thing?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. His gaze softened. "I do, and I think, deep down, you're not as sure as you think you are." I wanted to argue, to insist that I was absolutely certain. But the truth was that a tiny part of me wasn't. That tiny part, the one I had ignored for so long, was now impossible to silence. I looked away, my fingers tracing the seam of a cushion, my mind drifting back to the first time we had talked about this. It wasn't an argument, but it wasn't exactly an easy conversation either. We had both made our points clear, and I had walked away feeling certain that I was right, that I had made the best decision. But now he was making me question everything. "I don't know," I finally admitted, exhaling sharply. "It's not that simple." He nodded, as if he had expected that response. "I get it, and I'm not saying you have to change your mind right now. I just want you to see things from a different angle. No pressure, no expectations. Just think about it." His words were gentle, but they carried weight. He wasn't demanding anything. He wasn't forcing me into a decision. He was just asking me to consider something I had refused to even entertain before. And that was almost harder to deal with, because deep down I knew when someone you love makes you stop and reconsider something you were so sure about, it means there's more to it than you initially thought. I let out a slow breath, my heart pounding just a little faster than before. "Fine. I said finally. I'll think about it. But even as I said it, I had no idea where that decision would lead me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out. That night, I barely slept. My husband's words kept playing in my head, over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. I turned from one side to the other, staring at the ceiling, my mind restless. How had I gone from being so sure to suddenly feeling uncertain? The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I went about my usual routine, coffee, emails, a quick call to my friend, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. My husband hadn't even brought it up again, which somehow made it worse. He wasn't pressuring me, wasn't pushing his opinion, and yet I felt like something inside me was shifting. I caught myself watching him more closely that day, noticing little things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way he absent-mindedly tapped his fingers against the kitchen counter while waiting for his toast. The way his brows furrowed when he was lost in thought. He seemed calm, like he had already made peace with whatever would happen next. But I hadn't. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, I finally asked, "What if I can't change my mind?" He didn't look surprised. Instead, he just took a deep breath and set his fork down. "Then you don't," he said simply. "I don't want you to do anything you don't believe in, but I also don't want you to hold on to something just because it feels safe." Safe. That word hit me harder than I expected. Was that what this was about? Had I been clinging to my decision because it was easier than facing the unknown? I wanted to push the thought away, but suddenly, memories from the past started creeping in. Moments where I had chosen comfort over risk. Times when I had ignored my gut because change felt too big, too uncertain. I swallowed hard, pushing my plate away, my appetite gone. "I just don't want to make a mistake." His eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. "Neither do I. But sometimes, not taking a chance is the biggest mistake of all." I had no response to that, because deep down, I knew he was right, and that terrified me more than anything. The weight of his words lingered between us, thick and unshakable. I wanted to push back, to defend my reasoning, but something inside me refused to let me speak. Instead, I just sat there, staring at my half-empty plate, my stomach twisted in knots. The following days felt different. I could tell he was giving me space, letting me process everything without pressure. But that only made it harder, because now the decision was entirely mine. There was no argument to fight against, no tension to push away, just my own thoughts, circling endlessly, refusing to settle. One evening, as I was folding laundry, I heard him on the phone in the next room. His voice was low, careful. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. His tone, the small sighs in between sentences. He was trying not to sound disappointed, trying not to sound like he was already preparing for an answer he didn't want to hear. Something in my chest tightened. I sat there for a while, a towel still in my hands, my mind racing. What if I was wrong? What if my hesitation wasn't coming from logic, but from fear? The idea sent a chill down my spine because, for the first time, I realized I might not be as in control of this decision as I thought. That night, as we got ready for bed, I watched him from across the room. He wasn't saying anything, wasn't asking, but I could feel the unspoken tension settling in the space between us. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "You think I'm scared, don't you?" He glanced up, his hands pausing mid-button on his shirt. He didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything. "I think," he let out a slow breath, "I think you're overthinking it, and I think you know what you really want. You're just afraid of what it means." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. He wasn't wrong, but admitting that felt like losing something, like stepping into a place I wasn't ready to go. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling once again, but this time something felt different. The walls I had built so carefully around my thoughts were starting to crack, and I didn't know if I was ready for what would happen when they finally broke apart. The silence in the room felt heavier than before, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I turned onto my side, watching the soft glow of the nightlight against the far wall, my mind still tangled in everything he had said. He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing and accepting were two very different things. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, but my sleep was restless, filled with dreams that blurred the line between memory and fear. I woke up with a start, my pulse pounding in my ears. The room was dark, except for the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. I glanced over at my husband. He was awake too, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling just like I had been earlier. "You can't sleep either?" I whispered. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine in the dim light. "No," he admitted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was strange how much could be said in silence. Then, just when I thought the conversation had ended for the night, he exhaled sharply. "I need to tell you something." His tone made my stomach tighten. "What is it?" He hesitated, rubbing his hands over his face before sitting up. "I wasn't completely honest with you." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "This isn't just about us. There's something else. Something I haven't told you because I didn't want to pressure you, but I can't keep it from you anymore." My breath caught in my throat. "Just tell me." He hesitated for only a second before finally saying, "I already made a decision, a while ago." The words hit me like a slow-moving crash, one I saw coming but still wasn't prepared for. "What?" I managed to say. He ran a hand through his hair, looking both guilty and determined. I thought, I thought if I gave you time, you'd come to the same conclusion. I wanted it to be your choice, not something forced. But the truth is, I couldn't wait forever. I sat up, my heart hammering. "So what? You went ahead with it anyway?" He didn't answer immediately, and that silence was answer enough. I felt a rush of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion. "You let me sit here, second guessing myself, losing sleep over this, when you had already decided?" His jaw tensed. "I didn't want to deceive you. I didn't know how else to handle it." I shook my head, trying to process everything. Just hours ago, I thought I was the one struggling with the decision. But now the choice had already been made, and I had no idea what that meant for us. A heavy silence stretched between us, the weight of his confession pressing down on my chest. My mind raced, trying to piece everything together, to understand how we had gotten here. I wanted to be angry. Maybe I was. But more than that, I felt something else, something I couldn't quite name. I swallowed hard. "So, what happens now?" My voice was quieter than I expected. He looked at me, searching my face for something: understanding, forgiveness, maybe both. "That's up to you," he said, "but I need you to know I never wanted to go behind your back. I just—" He stopped, shaking his head. I couldn't wait any longer. I let out a slow breath, my heart pounding. For so long I had been trapped in my own head, too afraid to take a step in either direction. And now, the decision had been made for me. There was no more time to overthink, no more space for hesitation. And yet, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling betrayed, I felt relief, like the weight I had been carrying had suddenly been lifted. Maybe I had been waiting for this all along. Maybe deep down, I had needed him to make the choice I couldn't. I met his eyes, realizing for the first time that I wasn't as upset as I thought I should be. "You really believe this is the right thing?" I asked. His expression softened. I do. And in that moment, I knew. So did I. I just hadn't been ready to admit it until now. I sat there for a long time, letting everything settle in, the emotions, the doubt, the weight of the choice that had been lingering over me for so long. And yet, now that the decision had been made, now that there was no turning back, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel anger. I just felt at peace. He reached for my hand hesitantly, as if unsure whether I would pull away. But I didn't. I let his fingers intertwine with mine, feeling the warmth of his touch, the steady presence that had always been there, even when I refused to see it. This changes everything, I said quietly. He nodded. I know. And yet, as I sat there, staring at him in the dim light of our bedroom, I realized something. Maybe change wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe deep down, I had been afraid of letting go of the person I thought I had to be, the version of myself that had clung so tightly to certainty. But certainty doesn't always mean happiness. Sometimes it just means staying still because moving forward feels too uncertain.